Hello there! Today I watched the finale for the show Secret Invasion, and now I want to do a review for the final episode and discuss a few of my thoughts on the show. To start off with, let's go over the episode and talk about it before jumping into my final thoughts for this season. This video will contain spoilers. This episode saw Fury and Gravik come face to face for their final confrontation, and at the same time, an attack on Ritson happens at the hospital after he's ordered a strike on the Skrull compound. It's the climax of the season and can be split into three distinct parts. Conversation between Fury and Gravik in which they discuss their motivations and bare their souls to one another, the attack on Ritson in the hospital, and the boss fight against Gravik. The conversation between Fury and Gravik is an emotional moment in which both actors are given a chance to emote and monologue from their characters' perspectives. For Jackson, this is a scene of him expressing regret and honesty while suffering from radiation poisoning. Jackson plays the sickly aspect well while still managing to slip a few good facial expressions into the mix. He does get outshone by Kingsley Ben-Adir in this scene though. Kingsley Ben-Adir as Gravik spends this scene letting all of his rage and sorrow out on Fury. He tells him about how his work twisted his soul, how Fury's lies shattered his hopes, and then he boasts like a wounded child about how he took power back from them. It's a truly wonderful performance in which Ben-Adir shows off a complete understanding of the character, like a boy gone wrong finally sticking it to his father figure. The conversation takes place in the bowels of the Skrull compound in the middle of the device Gravik built. The lead up to that moment was fairly mundane and short, with ominous music playing as Fury made his way through. The one thing I did like was the attention to little details like the traitor's corpse being left behind or how abandoned the place looked. In this scene, they make use of close-ups of the actors' faces as they speak with little bits of the device in the background. The background is blurry and all of the focus is on the actors. The actors are well lit so you can see all of the emotions on their faces as they fight. This section is the strongest part of the episode. Next we have the attack on Ritson at the hospital. It takes place in the same sets as last week in a single hospital room. The journey from Ritson's room to Fallsworth confronting Rhodey was boring and confusing. The scenes were cut up and mixed in with the other storyline and it just made things harder to understand. We see Rhodey running around the hospital, but he's not actually getting anywhere, and we don't really know where he's going. And all we really know is that someone is taking out the guards. When Sonya shows up, things finally become clear, but it's also clear that the writer is just buying time for the big reveal. They do a silly little back and forth that isn't all that interesting, and it ends in a simplistic way that was unsatisfying. This section actually wasn't all that well done, and it didn't have the effect they wanted. Cheadle is trying to make something of it, but there wasn't much he could do. The final section is the boss battle with Gravik. It begins with a big reveal, and then we get a decent smackdown. Most of the scene is CGI action, but they did a lot more with it than I expected, and it ended up being a lot of fun. They had Gravik and his opponent using powers from a ton of different characters, although they did end up punching each other a lot with different muscle arms. My favorites were seeing Mantis's powers show up at the perfect moment, and how Ghost's powers were used to dodge attacks. This scene doesn't have any emotions to it though, because the show skips right past them and has the actor start with a single action hero line before they start throwing haymakers. It makes for an intense fight, and both of the actors do a good job of the facial expressions during it, but it did lack a little bit of the emotional impact it should have had. The scene is also cut together with the bits at the hospital, and it does take away from the momentum. The whole thing is scored with simple background instrumentals that follow the action well and give it that superhero vibe. The episode ends with a final conversation between Fury and his wife, and a little epilogue that explains the aftermath. The epilogue introduces one of the most interesting conflicts to hit the MCU in years, and gives Fury and Vara a bit of a happy ending. They get to ride off into the stars together. Overall, this episode saw some great acting from Kingsley Ben-Adir, Sam Jackson, and Olivia Colman. We get a sweet final boss fight against Gravik, and the whole thing is accompanied by a solid production value. The music could have been a bit more original, and they could have fleshed out certain sections better, but the writing was interesting and consistent. It wasn't the best episode I've ever watched, but it was a good one. As for a rating, I'd give this episode an 8 out of 10. Now normally I'd end the video here, but I have a few thoughts on this season as a whole, and I want to articulate them somewhere. I really liked this season, but I think they shot themselves in the foot just a little bit. There were two things that bothered me the whole time: the length of the show and the lack of screen time for Emilia Clarke as Gaia. Emilia Clarke plays one of the most important characters of the show and a potentially important character in the MCU's future. This season was basically her introduction to it and her origin story. It's told in pieces, and they never let Emilia really flesh out the emotions of her character. They always did her dirty by not focusing on her or giving more attention to the actress she was with. Either she's not a good actress and they had to cut those scenes, or she's a fine actress and they just didn't let her because they didn't have enough time to do it properly. Either way, Gaia feels like a background character despite being a part of the most important moments in the first season. That's going to bite them in the future. The other problem I had might also explain why they cut her time so short. This season is only 6 episodes and each episode is about 35 minutes. That's about 3.5 hours of runtime. This is just a little too long and full of filler to be a movie, but also not long enough and not in-depth enough to qualify as a show. In my opinion, they should have given this show at least 6 more episodes and done each part a little slower. The pacing always felt just a little rushed. The extra time would give you a lot more time with each of the leads. As it is, you end up feeling like you don't really know them, and yet you want to. Now that I've got that out, I'm actually done. If you have any thoughts on the show, let me know in the comments down below. Bye-bye.